Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am Spencer, one of the hosts from CAU Podcast. And with me, as always, is Chris. And we have a very special guest with us today. As you guys can see below us, we have Brandon Novus Vita. He's actually one of the analysts from the Paris Legion. Brandon, how's it going?
It's going good, man. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to being on.
Yeah, no problem. And I mean, from some of you are asking, like, hey, Paris Legion, like, this is a Toronto
Yeah.
Ultra podcast. What's going on? So one of the reasons we wanted to bring Brandon on was because obviously Paris had themselves a tournament. I know everyone's talking about Toronto Ultra and their ability to clutch up and win their own home series, but the week before that, Paris actually had arguably just as clutch of a performance to sort of put themselves in that top 8. So I want to hear sort of, Brandon's thoughts on how they were able to do that and maybe some parallels between Toronto and Paris. But also, Brandon, maybe some people don't know this, but you're actually from Toronto yourself. Am I correct in saying that? Yeah. So
that's right.
I'm sure you were a little bit disappointed once we actually got into the top 4 and it became clear that you guys weren't going to the top 8. But sort of once that was solidified, it must have been nice to see Toronto clutch it up in the finals, right, and get that chip.
I'll leave it as no comment. Obviously, my alliances are with Paris right now. I know both of us did everything we could to get to the top 8 position. So, kudos to Toronto for getting it done.
Yeah, exactly. And both teams, I think they've both been on upward trends. But before we get into that, do you mind telling us just like a little bit more about your backstory, about kind of how you got into the Call of Duty League and stuff like that?
Yeah, 100%. So born and raised in Toronto, obviously, for the longest time have been a viewer of competitive Call of Duty since like 2010, I believe. Went to university for engineering, did a degree as well in analytics. Crossed a bunch of different industries with different jobs, all using data, but something was always just missing. Like the passion was kind of missing. So this last year, I spent a lot of time, building up my brand in the Call of Duty side, putting out, analyses and breakdowns of search and destroy, and looking at the data with Call of Duty. And as last year's season ended, a couple conversations later with different org owners. And now here I am with Paris, working as their analyst. So focusing a lot with data and analytics, trying to basically optimize any way that we can to basically optimize our performance and put ourselves in the best position at any time, whether it's in the vetoes or in game situations or different game modes. How can we increase our probability of coming out with success? Yeah, that's me in a nutshell. And yeah.
And so I think we had talked about this a bit before, but I just want to give a little bit of context. But I mean, it would be great if there was a lot of like machine learning and stuff like that goes into analytics. But for the most part in Call of Duty, is it just sort of like you manually going in there and trying to like get all these stats together and make like build storylines from what you see yourself? Or is there like other tools that you kind of have access to?
So yeah, traditionally, I think COD is, you look back at like sports back in the day and, how people gathered the data then. They'd be watching the replays, they'd be, checking off, different boxes. Did they hit the shot? Was it blocked? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think COD started off that way as well. And there's been, I guess, a transition to more advanced methods. And I believe, me as well as some other analysts in the scene also are, looking at other ways to collect data and analyze data. So my background being analytics, I like to use a lot of computer vision to extract data from the screen to help, I guess, provide me like a more robust data set, I guess. Not just your kills, your deaths, but you're looking at other things around the timing of kills and deaths, which hills they are, etc. So I won't go into too much depth because obviously that's
fair enough.
that's my little competitive secret, but yeah, I definitely think that we're just scratching the surface with what's possible around data and analytics with Call of Duty, and it's looking very bright with where things are going, I want to say.
Wow, totally that must have been an absolute drag when you have to sit there and actually like read and watch all the VODs and do that too. Because if you want to get any data on any other teams, you have to watch theirs too. So you're basically just sitting there watching VODs all day long.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't complain about it though. It's definitely there's definitely enjoyment in doing that.
Yeah, that's true. I guess
both in the process and then and the outcome when you get to analyze the data as well. So
that totally makes sense. Now, talking about Paris and Toronto, they have both, they really both turned their seasons around. Like I said before, they've kind of gone both in an upward trend. With Paris getting really high finish in the tournament before, and Toronto winning their tournaments in the very last tournament of the season, their home stands. So I guess, some of us have theories on why, Toronto's been able to turn around. But for you, why do you think, Paris has been able to turn their season around and, make it into what it is along with Toronto as well?
I mean, so let me touch on like Paris, like just to provide some context. The beginning of the year, everyone had us like at the bottom of the power rankings, like number 12. We came out in the season hot, we did the best that we could in the first event, so we went 2-0.
Yeah.
It's the best anyone could do. And then we went to the London event, made the semifinals there, followed by the Atlanta event. I think we lost in Minnesota twice. That was a bit of a bummer.
Mm-hmm.
And then the switch to online happened. And since the online, I guess, era has happened, there are a number of different reasons that I guess we can attribute things to, but the result of it was we went on the longest losing streak out of any team. We were like 0-9 in series, and the next closest team I believe is Minnesota right now. They're 0-8, so they could tie us depending on how their first game goes at champs, but we'll see. So we went 0-9 in series, and then we got our first win against LG, and that win was pretty huge for us. It kind of reminded us that hey, obviously, we still have what it takes. And the following event, our last event, for us to make a chance or put our best foot forward to make top 8, made to the finals, and unfortunately lost to Dallas. So, I won't go into too much detail about the Dallas series. There's some conversation around Dallas playing us on a Dallas host, and they have 4 people in Dallas. Who knows if it would have been any different otherwise? But that was the case. But yeah, we had a great event, and I would, if I look at like, what was it for us that helped turn things around? Like, we see the scrims every single day. Like the players are obviously in the scrims, and like we obviously know that we can hang there. We're competitive. But then what really set us apart this last event and the last couple events for us is our search and destroy. I think in the last 6 events, Paris actually has the best search and destroy win rate out of any team. So better than Dallas, better than LAG, all the teams that you would think of as like the S&D team. So search was a huge focus for us going into the last couple of tournaments. I'd have to highlight a couple of players like Zed and Luca for us. Both those players very high on the leaderboards for first bloods per round. So they get the first pick, and then our team works together to clean up, win the 5v4. So that I would attribute our recent success to our search and destroy, and we're obviously looking to keep that going into champs. You asked me about Toronto, so Toronto is interesting as well. I wouldn't say like it's the exact same story for Toronto. They had other issues. They were trying to figure out their puzzle piece of 10 man of the 10-man roster, and what's like the optimal 10-man or 5-man to put forward. Is an interesting stat. I don't know if you guys know, but ever since Kleenex has joined the roster, they went from a 30% series win rate to a 70% series win rate, which is absolutely incredible. Like that increase. I mean, you can't say it's all due to Kleenex, but him coming in and how he works with the team and what that does for the team, it's really enabled them to see the success that they're currently seeing, I believe.
Yeah. We actually asked Methods that when he came on, like in the previous episode, was sort of like, hey, like I think we went from you're right, like I think we had a 73% win rate since Kleenex entered the lineup, and obviously you can't attribute it all to Kleenex. It's not like he's dropping a 2-point, KD every time he steps on.
He's not 1v5ing.
No, he's not 1v5ing, but Methods was like putting it really right, where he was like, you know what, even when he's not on, he's like, even if you look at him, he's going like 5-7 or 10-14. He's like, it's an annoying 10-14. Like even when he's like not necessarily getting all the kills, he's super good at just like annoying the enemy team and like requiring like a lot of their sidelines and stuff like that. And then obviously when he's playing well, he's like, the game's just so easy because he's just able to get so many picks and like so many trades and get out of there. Like it just like really like enables the team. But I totally agree that like him coming in was a big sort of shifting for this team.
Yeah,
exactly.
I mean, he's got like, in my opinion, he's got the talent, but he's also pretty smart with the decisions he's making as well. So it really helps his team put them in the best situation to come out on top for the different like team engagements. Yeah,
exactly. So you guys say you guys improved a lot on S&D. was that like a conscious decision for you guys to be like, hey, we're gonna start specifically practicing, doing more practice around those skills and those strategies, or is that something that maybe came with any roster changes or any new strategies or like
Yeah.
a meta shift?
So truth is, I mean, throughout the year we've been pretty consistent with like search practice, always kind of ramping it up a couple of weeks before each tournament. I don't think it was a conscious decision, more just adjustments that were made to search leading into the most recent tournaments that kind of helped us unlock some new strategies, unlock some new ways to play, and obviously resulting in our recent success.
Because even with you guys, you mentioned like your recent success and going to the finals, but even the tournament before that, because we actually played you guys in round 1, and even though we won 3-1, it wasn't a dominant 3-1, right? Like it was a really close game between Toronto and Paris. And you're right, like as soon as you guys played that, I was like, man, your search and destroy was deadly. So I had started to see the improvements even before you went on the became the finalists in the most recent tournament. That you guys have been looking good for at least a couple, because that was a really good game between Toronto and Paris.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, we kind of talked about this before, but even a potential for us to meet up in the next round of champs, depending on how.
I mean, hopefully not.
And depending on what we do as well.
Yeah,
obviously.
hopefully, I'm rooting for you guys to get through.
Me in the finals. That's what you mean, right?
Yeah, meet in the finals is what
exactly.
you're trying to say. Battle of Europe. Anybody? Battle of Europe? Can't wait. But you mentioned it a little bit earlier too, and I was wanting to get your opinion because it's something Chris and I have dealt with a lot on the show. We asked Methods about it. We've asked Dominique about it. And maybe it'd be cool to get an outsider sort of perspective, as like an outsider in terms of like the Toronto, obviously not an outsider in terms of the league itself. Toronto did something very interesting this year where they sort of had like a 10-man roster. This is something that we'd seen, the Defiant from Overwatch do with like nowhere near as much success. And it's something that I think was a little bit controversial coming into the year. What are sort of your thoughts on how a 10-person roster can work in Call of Duty? Because obviously, I mean, at the end of the day, it worked out, right? Like we were able to win a championship, and Methods brought up a really cool point where of the starting 5 on the championship roster, 4 of them were not on the starting roster when the year began, which is kind of a really cool stat. On the other hand, I'm sure it definitely adds to a stressful sort of environment for some players, and I kind of just want to hear your thoughts as a whole on like what you think that sort of 10-man roster would look like, maybe like in another game next year or moving forward.
Yeah, I think at the beginning of the season when they announced the 10-man roster, I think a lot of the people outside the Toronto ecosystem, we were looking at it like, this is very odd, not sure what the thought process is there, but they had a very, they're very, I guess, determined or, with what they wanted to do. And I think I don't know if it exactly worked out the way they wanted to. Like I had heard things around, maybe they're going to have like a respawn team and then bring in like S&D specialists for the S&D game mode, or whether what maybe like for domination, for example, and that didn't pan out that way. But what they were able to do is obviously they want to chip. So without a doubt, I think you have to say that it worked out for them. I think the question is like, could they have done it more optimally? You have like a couple players who never even saw the starting lineup. Yeah. Were they the right picks at the beginning of the year? I'm not sure. Because you could also argue like if they weren't there, then maybe the team doesn't get the same type of practice. Like the sub bench doesn't get the same type of practice. Yeah. Then they don't get noticed, and they don't get promoted to the main roster. So anything could have changed. We would not know how their season would go if any changes were made. But definitely it worked out for them, I'd want to say.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about it, like one of the logical reasons is that 5v5 they can play themselves, they can practice their own strategies. In SND, when they without anybody else knowing, right? Because you run the risk of giving away strategies when you play other teams. You run the risk of getting strategies even when you play chance teams, because who knows what allegiances they have to different people and what connections they have. So, but it's interesting because I don't even think our best part of the last couple of tournaments was our S&D. I think our respawn had significant improvement and was one of our shining points for the last couple of tournaments.
Mm-hmm. No, you're definitely right. I think that is another benefit. Like you have these private practices that can occur where you're not really showing any other teams what you're doing. Whether or not they actually occurred, I'm not sure. But imagine like you think about traditional sports, and this is kind of like pushing the envelope of like where esports is. In traditional sports, during practices, you don't scrim other teams. You do drills over and over again. How do you enter the zone in hockey, or how do you play this defensive setup in basketball? In theory, Toronto could do the same thing, drill a hard point over and over again. How do we break P2 Hackney? How do we, or S&D, how do we want to, refine this particular opening on this map? So I think there's a lot of like opportunity with that, but I'm not sure if it works out entirely the way I'm saying it, because maybe there's some animosity that exists just because of like how the players work together, or how the two teams work together. But
right, because that's the difference. Sorry, I cut you off there. I was just going to say that's the difference between like traditional sports and esports is like in hockey, like I can have my line A scrim my line B, because I know that yes, Crosby might play 20 minutes a game, but it's a 60-minute game. There's like 40 other minutes in there for the rest of the team to sort of take that spot. Esports is a little bit different, right? Because it's like one your starting five would just play the entire season, and the people on the bench are like, well, wait a minute. They don't get any play time. So I definitely see both sides. I could definitely see like animosity building. I'm not sure if it did, but I like personally, like I could see it building. I think Methods was saying, like, he's like, man, if I was on the bench, like I'd be like, screw that, right? Like I'd be, looking at that person, be like, I can be there, and exactly.
That's an interesting dichotomy between, once again, sports and esports. I mean, esports, really, to be able to train, you need something to interact with that is like not an NPC, like typically not an NPC. It's like some actual other person. The only way to do that is to play against other people. Or in sports, I can go out and, if I used to play rugby, so I can train my tackling like pretty easily by myself. And also, like, without the most sports, like you said, there is a lot of subs and sub interchange, but unlike sports, you have your physical limitations that do get reached a lot of the time when you are playing, and you don't have that in esports. So
it's also not like Overwatch, where like in Overwatch you'll summon a guy because it's a particular map, and you want to run a different composition, whereas in COD there isn't really like the idea of a composition. You have your set composition, and that's just what you run from map to map, series to series.
Although it'd be interesting to see if that ever makes its way into COD. I don't know if it ever would, but like, I mean, you kind of, I feel like see it sometimes where people like go into like K, for instance, and they run a little bit more AR strategies. But it'd be interesting to see if that ever does, like a game comes around where you could sort of like really like hone in like specific roles for specific maps in Call of Duty, but like we'll see. But I thought one thing you brought up that was really interesting that I actually never thought about was sort of how, because Toronto had like an A and B team, the B team actually got to scrim maybe a little bit more than like a random challengers team would, and so it allowed those players to be discovered. I actually never even thought about that, but you're right. Like, I mean, I see Brack on Twitter, right? He's streaming scrims all the time, and sometimes I'll go in there and I'll watch the B team scrim, and you can even see like sort of who's doing well in relation to other top tier talent. Whereas I'm sure like the challengers teams do get scrim time, but at the same time they are like a challengers team. So yeah, that's actually a pretty good point. Never thought about that.
Yeah, speaking about that, like scouting wise, like I think one of the best ways for like pro teams to scout is actually to scrim against these amateur teams, because we get to see in the challengers bracket like who wins the challenger tournaments.
For sure.
But then there's no opportunity for them to play against pro teams with the way that the current like tournament structure is. At least in previous years, you'd have your your qualifiers from the open bracket, which could include challengers teams, and then you'll get to see those Cinderella stories of how they make their open bracket runs, and then they upset these pro teams. But we don't have that anymore. So now, when a pro team gets a scrim, an amateur team, there's the opportunity to see, what they're all about. And, we've seen teams make decisions around that, like Florida, for example. I know Chicago do scrim a lot of like amateur teams. I don't think they've picked up anyone on that side yet, but, even OGLA picking up 2 amateur players. So it's definitely, we're definitely seeing the esport evolve and in many different facets.
And not even just that, like it's not even like, teams have went in there and picked up amateur players and they bombed, right? It's like, man, Draza had himself a hell of a tournament for the last couple of times. Awakening, won his first 3 maps, and Mac, I could argue, was like an MVP candidate this year. By the way, he was sort of able to turn that roster around. Like it seemed like the rookies had like a huge impact this year in terms of So
exactly. So just to change gears a little bit here, I want to talk kind of about how the meta has shifted throughout the season, because obviously, you're probably more knowledgeable, definitely more knowledgeable, with, Call of Duty metas than we are. And I'm sure that there's a lot of people who are listening and want to learn a little bit more about how these meta shifts have caused the game to shift. So can you tell us, I guess, a little bit more about what you have observed has happened with MP5 nerfs and subsequently the 10 millimeter ammo allowing? Kind of like
Yeah,
how
I mean,
With
the
we
game is.
reallowed.
That.
yeah, there's a lot of changes, I guess, that occurred like throughout the season. But I mean, this season was kind of odd too because there was never really like a competitive update that happened early on for the game, and then all of a
Yeah.
sudden, like there was an update that came out that adjusted a bunch of attachments and the guns. So for the longest time, the meta was like a 1 AR, 4 sub, and the only map that you saw more ARs on was Cave. And then it hit a certain point where I forget exactly what the changes were, but it basically enabled a bunch of other guns to become viable. Like people started trying out the AUG, people started trying out the MP5 with the 9mm mags because I think the 10mm got nerfed a bit. A whole bunch of other guns started coming out, so it went from like stability to chaos. Then obviously, GAs started coming into effect because you're like, well, this is overpowered, or basically that kind of thing. So we've kind of hit more of a stable point now where it's back to 3 MP5s and 2 ARs, and the MP5 right now runs, I think, the 10mm. We went through a phase where that was banned, and then they brought it back. So the other part to the meta as well is not just the patching, but on the pro circuit, they've enabled 60 hertz servers for competition. So when you do that, it kind of makes certain guns a little bit more viable due to like the hit registration.
Yeah.
So that's why we're starting to see like the second AR. Even Florida, I think at one point we're running 3 ARs on like Ramaza hardpoint. Might even still do that. I'm not even sure, but I don't think they're at 2. But yeah, basically, we're starting to see the evolution of more ARs come into play. Like for us, like Luca is our flex player. He'll be switching between like the sub and the M4, but he's comfortable playing like that faster AR role, which you'll now see like on every team.
Yeah. So do you mind breaking down this kind of 60 hertz thing a little bit more? So if somebody who doesn't really get hit registration, the difference between MP5s and ARs, what's really going on there? Like how does hit registration enable an AR
hertz,
more versus an MP5?
12 hertz, like to my understanding, like there's only like 12 updates per second that's occurring, whereas on 60, there's more. I guess there's more updates happening per second. So with an AR that's like a slower rate of fire, those updates that occur on a 12 hertz may get bunched together on like different frames. I might not be explaining this correctly, but to my knowledge, that's kind of how to my knowledge, that's how it works. And with 60 hertz, it enables more of those bullets to register basically. With the M4, like now you've got a player who's viable in a close range situation, but if they happen to be like in a long range situation, which before they'd have a sub, now they have an M4, so they can actually take those long range engagements more effectively.
And
I thought part of it was also, sorry, Chris, I'll let you coming back in a second, but I thought part of it was, you kind of got it right, where it was almost like the update to 60 hertz, this allows more bullets to be registered, and like the M4's bullets just hit harder, right, at like longer range. So if each gun's hitting more bullets, the M4 is gonna like win out in those sort of situations.
That makes sense. Now in terms of like, when I'm thinking about kind of the shift in the meta with that, do you think that's kind of slowed down the gameplay? With people playing more longer sight lines, people less movement. I would guess there would be less movement, and therefore just people holding sight lines more. Is that what you've kind of seen, or?
I mean, just naturally, like when you swap like one of your sub players to an AR player, like as much as like they are the fast AR, they're still not as fast as like how they were with a sub player. So like even in the data we've seen, like the engagements have gone down significantly from when that patch has happened. And now they've kind of like reached sort of like a plateau of I guess where the meta currently stands. But yeah, the game has definitely slowed down a little bit, but it's still very fast paced for what it is.
And just final comment. I know I've been kind of squeezing Spencer out here.
That's fine. Go for it.
I feel like that would now favor strategy, like strategy specific teams. We were always talking about Toronto, how I thought towards the start and middle of their season they are a lot better in their strategy and just lacked on that frag potential. And I feel like that would help out a team that's better at strategy, because you have less, because the game is slower. I feel like you rely a little bit more on strategy and less on fragging out. But I could totally be wrong. There. It's just a thought.
I mean, without a doubt, like I think Toronto have adapted to it well. Like just given the result that they've seen, I can speak a lot more to ourselves. Like back when we were first learning the game, we were one of the only teams that ran 2 ARs on Hackney Dom. And a lot of teams started to pick up on that. And I think we continued to run that even throughout like, the original meta of three sub 2 AR. But just in general, like at the beginning of the season, we felt more comfortable running the 2 ARs with 3 subs, but had to adapt to the meta of 4 subs, 1 AR. So since it's transitioned back, I think it's kind of helped us out a lot in getting back to like what we were comfortable with.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah, and I think that totally makes sense. Like, I mean, again, like I don't know too much about COD history, but I mean, I know that it's usually been 4v4, but I feel like even in 5v5s, 4 subs probably aren't the norm. Like I've always felt like ARs have been like pretty impactful in Call of Duty. So I'm sure there's like a lot of teams that were in that similar situation where they kind of built their rosters for like a 3 AR meta, 2 AR meta, and ended up getting like a 4 sub. And that's why you saw teams like Atlanta just run wild, right? Because they had so many talented subs on that roster that they were just able to pop off.
Yeah, like even the past 2 years, there's always been 3 guns that have been viable, whereas this year is the first year that it's really only been two guns. I mean, previous to that, there was also like CODs that were two gun games, but at least with the last year, like there was the SOG, there was the Maddox, which is kind of in between like an SMG and an AR,
Yes.
and there was the ICR, which is kind of more similar to like a main AR M4 player currently.
That makes sense, and that kind of brings more into the flex role, right? Where like you could have like a flex player play that Maddox and sort of run kind of the in between both roles, where you'd get like your Kleenexes of the world, right? Who would just run that SOG, and then your Methods of Lucas who just run that ICR, which makes a lot of sense. So I mean, speaking of some of these like players that we just mentioned, I thought I was going to bring it up just because I wanted to hear your perspective as well. But like I think this has just been, we always give people sort of a time to like gas up their teams. So, like who has like been like a really big moment, or some of the players that really stood out to you, who've like helped sort of turn, like you said, that 0-8, 0-9 losing streak around. And who's really come into their own like more recently.
I mean, definitely everyone on the team had their moments like throughout the year. But of recent, speaking specifically about the search, like I think it has to go to the guys who are putting up like those first blood numbers. Zed, in the last tournament, I think he was ranked 3rd for first bloods per round. And then like Luca, he's our sniper player. Throughout the entire year, he's actually been top 10 in first bloods per round. So highly influential players and kind of opening up the map for us. And then, our last tournament as well, I didn't mention this, but we had the highest first blood conversion rate. That's, when you're up 5 versus 4, are you able to convert those first bloods into wins? So having players that open up the map and then having the team to then close out those rounds, I think that's what really like, made the difference for us this last tournament. And without a doubt, like obviously our respawn, we had to win a respawn to win the series as well. No, definitely an all-around team effort, I'd want to say.
Oh yeah, sorry, go Chris.
No, you go, sir. I've talked a lot already.
No, go for it. I was going to ask another question, but if you have something to say.
No, I was just going to say, I know you mentioned how you're a sniper player. I feel like snipers have really been enabled towards the latter half of the season, just with the changes. Because once again, maybe talking on my butt here, but I'm just going to go for it. With a slower game and less movement around, I feel like a sniper's main thing that they need is information, intel on where people are. And if where someone is and they're a little more static, then it's easier to keep a beat on them and make those plays, which are freaking awesome. I love seeing sniper plays. Cammy was popping off so
I was going to say,
hard.
you're just bringing this up because Cammy started popping off recently, isn't it? That's why you think snipers have more impact.
Cammy had an insane game
because
for
Cammy
sure.
had himself a game on Piccadilly. I don't know. I think if I'm a sniper, I'd rather try to snipe an SMG player than an AR player, but that's just me.
I'm just theory crafting. Could be bullshit, but what?
Cammy was winning the sniper battles, and then he was winning the sniper versus the other player battles. So he was definitely going off.
And it's funny that you brought up Luca. Sorry, keep going.
I'm not sure exactly, but I feel like he might even set like a record for like number of kills in an S&D. So hats off to him.
Generally, because he was I mean, that's actually funny you brought Luca. Luca really stood out to me because I think Cammy like all year long has been one of the best like S&D snipers in the game. And Luca was really giving it to him on the mat that we played. It was like Luca was having his moments for sure. So I was like, damn, this Luca guy's good.
Luca had a few people. Luca had Weston's number. Luca had Cammy's number.
Yeah, that's what I mean. And these are like really good like AR sniper players. Like Cammy's been, I think, in my opinion, the most improved player for I mean, you could argue in the league, in my opinion, but at the very least, that's definitely probably my bias showing. But on Toronto, he's had like definitely a glow up from like when this year first started to like where he is now. A glow up. Yeah,
I'm gonna bold statement, but I think he's a top 10 S&D player for sure in the league.
Yeah, I completely agree. His S&D is like phenomenal, especially in the most recent tournament. He was a big reason why we were able to come out on top.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, speaking of other players in Toronto, I mean, we kind of got to see your stand-up players from Paris. And I totally agree, by the way. But anybody from Toronto sticks out to you? I mean, I guess other than Cammy, who I think also is deserving of that conversation.
Yeah, so you mentioned Cammy, like obviously Kleenex, like I don't think anyone would disagree with that there. Like him coming in, and whether or not you attribute it all to him or in part to him, but 30% win rate to a 70% win rate. And then you can't mention the success without talking about methods. I think like without it, if you didn't have methods there, would they have won? They wouldn't have won those rounds, right?
Yeah.
And those rounds led to winning the tournament. So without a doubt, like methods clutched up huge for them.
Yeah, I think one of the things that led to Toronto's success is it was timing. Like I don't know what the insider on league do, if they know about these changes like well in advance or something like that, or that's kind of just sprung on them. But I feel like we made a change to bring in like Kleenex at the right time. I think the timing of that made it well too.
Well, I mean, you could argue it would have been a little bit more impactful earlier, right? You could have got a couple more wins in there if you go from a 30% to a 73%. I would have liked to see him in the starting lineup, but obviously, like I didn't know who Kleenex was in the year starter, right? I'm not going to sit here and be like, you should have put Kleenex in there. Like I feel like hindsight's 2020. I mean, maybe there's some inside people who were saying that before we noticed it, but like when he came in, I didn't know how good he was.
The best time to do anything is always like right now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like not to wait, kind of thing. So who knows? It could have been better earlier on, but at least we know that they've seen success with what the changes they've done. So
for sure,
hopefully they can carry it on forward.
So I think we've talked enough about sort of teams bouncing back throughout the year, because like I said, I think that Toronto and Paris are definitely like the hot teams who were a few weeks ago people were like will they even get top 8? Now all of a sudden I think you have some people bottom 4, and I think some people now are personally I would put them as some sort of upset potential teams to really make some waves in champs. Probably alongside, I think OGLA probably deserves OGLA deserves a shout out there. They've been looking pretty good with Draws and Hollow. But getting into champs and sort of previewing, this huge event, to cap off what I would think was an amazing year. From your perspective, I know it's a little cheap. If you could beat one team, who would it be? And I know you're probably like, hey, Seattle is our first matchup. But like, is there anybody else out there? Like, I don't know Paris like too well. Like I know in Toronto Defiant, the Overwatch stuff that we do, like Atlanta Reign is like our rivals. Like the fact that we get to the finals, like beating Atlanta Reign was really big for this team, I think. Is there anybody like that for Paris that maybe I'm just not aware of? Like that like rival, that thorn in your side that you would just love to meet in a match and sort of get the better of?
Yeah, there's no doubt that it's London. There's a lot of reasons why it's London. Like there's a couple clips of like Kismet, yelling the other way at the first LAN this event. The other thing with London too is 3 of their players used to play with 2 of our players last year on the reciprocity team.
Yeah.
So they kind of went their separate directions, and I think every time they match up, they all want to tell the other person that, hey, you made the wrong decision, kind of thing, or stick it in their face.
Okay.
So that match always means a lot. On top of it being the Battle of Europe.
Yeah.
So we won the last one. I think we even hold like the head-to-head against them. I believe it might be 2-1. So yeah, I think that's a match that we always look forward to. I don't know about look forward to, but we enjoy the win. We celebrate that win.
And I mean, hey, I think that would be best case scenarios for both of us, right? If you guys face London next round, that means you got the first win. That means we got the first win. Yeah. I think that would set up a really nice sort of storyline for that losers bracket. So, I mean, hey, I hope we see it too.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, anybody, we could just talk to general, I guess, preview. Is there any other teams that you think have a really good shot, like making some waves outside of the ones? Obviously, you think you guys are going to win the whole thing. Obviously, Chris and I think Toronto Ultra's going to win the whole thing. Any other teams that are sort of like really like
on your radar?
On your radar?
Yeah, you mentioned OGLA already, so I won't go into too much detail about them. But the other team that's on my mind is Minnesota. So they're on their 0-8 losing record. So they made a big change recently. They subbed out GodRx for Exceed.
Yep.
There's a lot of controversy around whether or not that was the right decision. I won't get into that, but at least from what I've seen in scrims, they're looking like a very competitive team. And I think they're gonna, I think a lot of people have them basically written off. especially with the move of GodRx for Exceed. But I don't think they'll go down without a fight. Let's just say. I think the series will be interesting. New York versus Minnesota.
Yeah.
Won't be a walk in the park for New York, at least.
That's interesting because it's funny. Like, I mean, not like, I mean, I follow Toronto Ultra. I wouldn't say I'm like a hardcore CDL fan where I follow the league as a whole, but the best of my knowledge was I felt like Minnesota made their name by being really, really successful, like in the first half of the season. And a big reason for that was GodRx was really putting up like an MVP sort of performance. And then he dropped off, not to the point where he was like, bad, but just to the point where he was no longer in that MVP conversation. I think the team followed suit. So yeah, I think it was pretty shocking to a lot of people that he was put on the bench. But I mean, like you said, the best time to make changes is now. And up until that change was made, I think I definitely had them written off because I think New York's actually a pretty good team.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah.
And I'd also say, from a pure stats point, you only lose so much until you win, right? And it could not be champs, but like, I think they've gotten to the point where they've got a chip on their shoulder, and they are probably grinding out these couple weeks to get to a point where they can give New York Subliners a good run for their money.
Yeah, they're definitely hungry. I think my one thought about them is I think taking out GodRx kind of takes out like a really talented sniper in S&D. So, will their S&D be as strong as it was before? Not sure. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what they come forward with.
It's such a weird thing about Call of Duty culture too, where you couldn't just be like, hey, we're like subbing him out for like respawns, but like, yeah, he'll play S&D still, right? Like he's our S&D. Yeah. And I feel like that doesn't happen as much in Call of Duty, whereas in Overwatch, you would totally see that. Like Seoul Dynasty actually legitimately last year ran, like you mentioned it earlier, they had a Koth team where they had 5 players who would play the King of the Hill mode, and then they'd have 5 players who'd play the other modes, like the escorts and the hybrids.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Definitely the culture not there. The culture is not there yet for Call of Duty. And I don't know if it'll ever be.
It was arguably not there for Overwatch. Like whenever they lost, people were like, "What are they doing?" And then they'd win, and they'd be like, "Oh my god, they're a genius." It was like it was super hot and cold.
Ride the bandwagon. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Wait, so are you literally not allowed to? Like, you're not allowed to make the subs, or it's just like culturally like?
No, you can. You can. That's like explicitly in the rules that you can like make mid-series substitutions. But it's just, I guess the culture's not there for it. And also like, you practice with this team like day in, day out. You learn their tendencies, and even like switching from mode to mode, like it's just not something that's done, I guess.
And obviously it's totally different like Call of Duty and Overwatch. Like I don't want to make that comparison like it's black and white, because the difference between an AR player in Search and an AR player in Hardpoint is not the same between a Pharah player in Overwatch and like a McCree. You know what I mean? Like such different skill sets. Whereas like I feel like if you're gonna go like an AR player in either mode, they're usually pretty similar, right? Even like an SMG to AR player, like there's a lot of players who can flex and play both successfully.
Yeah.
So it definitely
you'll see that quite a lot actually. Like SMG players switching to the AR in S&D.
Yeah, I mean even Mac from New York was a great example. Mac was like an SMG. People were like, he's like your SMG one trick, and he pulled the AR in the most recent tournament, popped off with it, or 2 tournaments ago. So like,
yeah, and also like when it comes to Overwatch, there's so many different skill sets to learn that it's very hard to master multiple. Yeah, let alone get to a very, very good state in multiple. When you have, when you're an SMG or AR player, and there's 2 guns that are viable. It is really, really, I think it's like a lot easier for people to be really, really good at a game. And the difference between a very, very top player and a player that's still a pro but not a top isn't as much as you'd see a difference between a top Overwatch player being and a less good Overwatch player being, which kind of makes sense because, I feel like the skill difference between the top teams in Call of Duty League and the bottomish teams in Call of Duty League is a lot smaller than it is in Overwatch. In Call of Duty, I can still expect, especially when Toronto wasn't playing well, to go toe-to-toe with some of the best teams. I can never expect Toronto to find to do that with San Francisco Shock, which is like the best team in Overwatch.
Yeah, perfect example of that is like LAG took Atlanta to Game 5. So
that like very rarely happens in Overwatch. Yeah, it's pretty much like you got 4 teams at the top, and then everybody else is sort of below them, at least in NA. But I guess one of the final questions I'll leave you with today. We obviously appreciate your time and thank you so much for coming on. I'm not going to ask you who you think's going to win, because obviously Paris. But who are you guys going to beat in the finals? I think is the best way I could frame this question. You know what I mean? Like if you give a little prediction. Yeah, exactly. Who will you beat in the finals?
I mean, if I'm being realistic, I think Dallas is probably going to make it there. I think it's a toss-up between Dallas, Atlanta, Florida. But for me, I think Dallas will be the one that makes it all the way there.
Pulls it over the top. No bias from them beating you in the previous tournament, right? That's what it is. It's the revenge.
Yeah.
The only team that can take you is Dallas.
Yeah, from what I hear, there might be some more, I guess, error server, I guess, setups. So that'll be an interesting one.
Yeah, that's fun. I like it. I like that one. Dallas, feel interesting. I think, I still think FaZe is going to clutch it in the end, and like to get to the finals, obviously, then lose to Toronto. From my perspective,
of course.
But I think I know they've definitely tapered off as this went to online. The last metas haven't necessarily, but I feel like push comes to shove, they're just gonna frag out. Like I just think there's so much talent on that team. But Dallas is a good shout.
Yeah. I mean, both those teams, I think you can't go wrong with either of those picks.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you know what? With that, I'd like to thank you for coming on and spending your time chatting with us. Definitely a lot of good insights from insider's perspective. But to anybody who's listening to this, where can they find you? Where can they find you on Twitter? Is there any other social media platforms?
Yep.
Let them know of.
Twitter.com/Novus Vita _GG. That's where you can find me. Post a lot of stats and fun insights of the game. So cool. Yeah, really, it was fun being on. Really appreciate it.
Oh, and I'd love to have you on. Maybe we'll have one on another time where we can just dive into the stats, because he's not kidding, guys. If you're a stats fan of Call of Duty, like that's actually how I initially discovered you. Like, there's so much good quality stats content that you put out there. So definitely give it a look if you're an analytical mind and you enjoy that stuff. But yeah, any final words, Chris, before we head this out?
Don't think so.
Awesome. So as always, guys, Brandon, thank you for coming on. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed, like, subscribe, check out the description for all Novus Vita stuff and all that fun stuff like that. And we'll see you guys next time. And as always, enjoy.